Welcome, I'm the Wordnerd, and in this video, we're going to gather the background information for Matthew. So this is basically a book introduction, all you need to know before diving deep or digging deep into the book of Matthew. So if you want more of an in-depth on how I get all of this information, you can check out the video that'll be linked in the description. And basically all you really need to do is get a good study Bible or study Bibles in my case. You can also use a Bible dictionary, which we're going to use in this video. I'm going to show you that. And you can also just look up historical information, getting good information online. So that is the free option. So for the most part, I use multiple resources and just kind of fact check everything, I guess, against each other's things, I guess, if you want to say. But I thought we would use a Bible dictionary for some of this information because Bible dictionaries are a great resource. So yeah, you just go to Matthew and you find the Gospel of Matthew, and it will have a bunch of information. A lot is included in the background information. And you can kind of just like read that and kind of fill in the boxes. But basically, so the author is Matthew. But none of the four Gospels included names in the original manuscript. They were anonymous, technically. But this isn't really surprising because that's just how they wrote. They didn't have, like, ours now. That's just what it was, right? But Matthew is also called Levi, and he was a tax collector. Matthew was also one of Jesus' 12 disciples. So it would be cool if you didn't really understand who Matthew was to kind of dig deeper into who that is. But basically, we know the author of Matthew by the church fathers. So I'll leave in the description below this website that has all of the church fathers' writings translated into English that you can read. And I think this is great. I think we should all read the church fathers because they're disciples of the disciples. And, you know, they were not so far removed as we are now. But anyway, so between 110 and 140 AD, Papias, I think I said that correctly, wrote that Matthew was the author of Matthew. So that's one. Then we have Irenaeus, who wrote around 100 AD. In his third book, in the first chapter, says that Matthew wrote Matthew. And then also in 200-ish AD, we have Tertullian, who also said that Matthew wrote Matthew in his fourth book in the second chapter. Now, you can kind of search within these websites so you can kind of find that information quicker if you didn't want to read everything at one time just to do this background. But you should probably put those on your reading list. So not everyone thinks that the authors were the ones that are said in the church fathers, but there is no good alternative and there is no other tradition. I think people and scholars and theologians that don't agree really just have an issue with the Bible in general, but that's neither here nor there. So, who is this written to? This was written to the Jews, or also known as the Hebrews. So, Irenaeus actually says this, that it was written to the Jews. Basically, Matthew was a Jew writing for Jews. You can really tell this throughout, if hopefully you've read the book of Matthew at least once, that Matthew goes back a lot about Old Testament references and prophecy fulfillment from the Old Testament, really pointing to Jesus as who Jesus is, the Messiah, and really going back to the scriptures of the Old Testament, or, the Jews' Bible, basically. Next is literary style. The literary style is historical narrative. So basically that is just history in story form. If you don't understand literary styles, that's just how something is written and how an author chooses to express truth. I highly recommend just doing kind of like a study on biblical literary styles and literary styles in general to get a better understanding if you don't know it. But that's the literary style. So it's history, but it's in story form. Now, when was it written? So this one's a little bit more tricky, but we do know that it was written in the 1st century while the eyewitnesses were still around. So most say it was written between 37 to 69 AD. Most definitely say that Matthew was written before 70 AD, before the destruction of the temple. Now, Irenaeus asserts that Matthew wrote his gospel while Paul and Peter were still alive. So most say that most likely Matthew was written between 56 and 64 AD. But some even say that he could have written even as early as the early 50s. So either way, we do know that he did write in the 1st century. So we're not too concerned about exact date. We can get close, but not exact with these kind of things. So say Irenaeus saying that Matthew wrote while Paul and Peter were still alive really narrows it down. So we do know that it was the 1st century, although, not too long ago. That was not taught. The Gospels were not taught as written while the eyewitnesses were still around and while even in the 1st century. So the next thing is, where was this written from? So where did Matthew write it? So for this, no consensus is held, and there actually is no means to resolve the issue. So most say that Matthew probably wrote from Antioch in Syria, which was a Roman province, and they have their reasons. I wrote it down, and I did read one where he wrote from Palestine. I'm not really sure why or where, but the consensus, at least most people say he wrote from Antioch. They have their reasons. Like I said, you can do more information. It's not really critical to interpret Matthew, so I don't really worry too much about it. Now, about location. Matthew didn't write to a specific location. He wanted his gospel to be read and travel to proclaim, Jesus to the Jews. So we don't have anything for a location. Now, you could write the major locations in Matthew right there, but I'm not really too concerned about that part. Now, we do have cultural information and then references. So I left references blank because my references are growing, and also I don't want to have to duplicate myself so many times. So if you saw my John background information, my John introduction video, you saw all my different references that I used. I used my study Bibles, Bible dictionaries, free online resources, and things like that. So as you can see here. Now, the cultural information I wrote for John was really about the cultural while the gospel was actually going on. So when Jesus was living, while the Jews was living within it. But number one, I didn't want to have to write that all. If you want to, you can pause and read what I wrote, or you can go to that video. But what I wrote this time was about what Matthew was actually probably going through while he was writing his gospel. So, because Matthew wrote surrounded and beset by Jews hostile to the claims of Jesus and the Christian community. So that's why most of the disciples died from martyrdom, like they were killed for their faith. So these gospel writers really wrote in a time where you can kind of see that as well in some of the gospels where they don't really say a name, but in a later gospel, they say the name, which kind of points to a little bit more of like the earlier gospel were still concerned about people being killed if they say who the names were. And then also in the Bible dictionary, you can kind of get a summary of Matthew himself, what he did, what he's done, and things like that. Also in the Bible dictionary. So if you don't have a Bible dictionary, I highly recommend getting one. I have the Pictional Bible Dictionary by Zondervan. Zondervan Bible Dictionary is really good. I have an older version in the 70s, but I also like this one. This one's a newer to my collection. So Faith from How to Faith a Life here on YouTube recommended the Tyndale Bible Dictionary, and so I decided to grab it and check it out, and I do really like it and really enjoy it. So that is a great resource if you don't have a Bible dictionary, and you can also get it secondhand. You don't have to buy it brand new to save some money. It wasn't that much. I found it, I think it was like $35, so it wasn't too much. So yeah, but I hope this is inspired and encouraged you to dig deeper into the Bible and to start really digging deep, maybe into Matthew, now that you have a kind of more of an introduction to it and kind of understand a little bit more of the background. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. And remember, God loves you and He's always with you. I'll see you in the next video. God bless.